Let's do the minutes of the last meeting, which was the July meeting. That's 2 months ago. And is there anything anybody wants? Oh, I better do apologies. Shall I do apologies first? No, because we've probably got people who we're going to have. So Natasha Curran, Waukesha, Jamie Gillespie, Ben Luscombe, Julie Hesketh, Sam Page. Mike, I think, is going to be here. I think he might just be in the traffic. And Shannon, I haven't heard from you. Yeah, no, not sure on that one. Okay. Declarations of interest of anything on the agenda anyone wanted to raise other than what's on the register? Or anything in particular? No, thank you. And so minutes of the July meeting. Anything on accuracy, first of all?
Nicola, can I just pick up on the performance report, page 8?
Yeah.
It's the second bullet point on the performance report, QMH migration. It's just the last sentence. It says the CCG will need to ensure mitigation is carried out successfully. I think probably what I was conveying was that we need to ensure that the Trust is getting suitable assurance from its third-party review that all relevant processes are in place and assuring the CCG rather than the CCG.
Yes, thank you. So would you give me the form of words for
I
that?
will.
Thank you. I've got just a couple of little things. On the BO5, the moving forward together, I think there's just the word moving missing on the second paragraph. It says in the middle of it, to progress the work, a moving forward together programme. It's just a word missing. And I thought we probably ought to just clarify on the same section, where there are 4 bullet points with dashes. The third one down says management cost savings, which for South West London is around 7 million, will go into frontline services. I think that's slightly misleading because it sounds a bit like we're going to put them into frontline services locally, and that's not quite the mechanism, is it? We probably ought to be clear about that. So I don't know if someone can suggest what we ought to be saying there instead. Because I don't think we said we're going to invest that locally in any particular things. It goes back to national.
Well, it goes back into front line. We're not sure yet whether it might come back into local because it's in our budgets, but we don't know if we're already going to be told what we've got to spend it on. That's the issue. So we will go back into our budgets because we hold the budgets, but and we will be asked to spend it on front line. The issue will how much freedom we will have around that. So it might be that they say, you know, use some of your 20% to spend on primary care networks or something else. So, but we don't know that yet.
Okay.
Since you raised an item on here, I was going to bring this up later. I'm not sure I understand the relationship between the 1.6 million in the second bullet point there and the 7 million in the third one. Could somebody explain to me what the relationship is there? Is one a subset of the other? Is one covering more?
So 1.6 is a subset of the 7. Right. The 7 is the total management cost reduction we have to find across South West London. Right. And the 1.6 is the costs that are associated directly with just getting rid of the 6 governing bodies. Right.
So the amalgamation costs save us around 20% of the total we have to save.
No, that's not. It's not the amalgamation cost. It's just the governing body costs. So there are different costs. So if I just sorry,
that's really what I was trying to understand.
Yeah, there are different costs. So there are. So 7 million is the total that we have to save. 1.6 million is just by not having 6 governing bodies. There are other savings associated with having one CCG, such as you only run one ledger, and therefore you can set your financial staff up differently. So there's a whole load of other stuff that's associated with amalgamation. But the actual pure, just the governing body costs is £1.6 million. Does that make sense? So that's just the cost of running 6 governing bodies. All the other costs can also make savings. So there's a lot more than 1.6 million associated with bringing together 6 governing bodies.
Yes, okay, I'm happy to take that as you've explained it now. I'd like to come back to that when we get later in the agenda.
We can do that.
I understand the relationship.
There's another 1.75 million associated with the staffing savings that would be associated with consolidation. So in total, it's £3.5 million. So it's about half of it that is associated with that, and the rest we're getting from consolidation of offices that we've already done, and I can't remember the other. CSU. And CSU, and we're taking some out of CSU as well.
Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Anything further on the minutes? No, and did we have any specific actions up there? I mean, I haven't missed anything there. Good, thank you very much. Can anybody flag any items for AOB that they have at this point so we can manage the agenda? No. Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll go on to the next part of the meeting, which this is about the health and care plan. So James, Josh, you go straight.
I'll lead off. I'm sure Josh, in terms of the local health and care plan, and Sarah, in terms of the South West London context, may want to add some comments. So really, this is just to cite the board on the fact that we are now in a process to develop a South West London-wide 5-year health and care strategy. This is a response to the NHS long-term plan that was published earlier this year, which contains a roadmap for the whole of the NHS for our priorities for the next 5 years. The basis of the South West London strategy, as has always been signalled as the case really for the last 2.5 years, is that we have our local health and care plans in each of the 6 boroughs, and the board has seen the Wandsworth local health and care plan at a number of points. The Wandsworth local health and care plan is now the basis of our commissioning intentions and our plans for this year, and our commissioning intentions process is basically being set up for 2020-2021 to deliver the local health and care plan in partnership with other organisations in Wandsworth who form with us the Wandsworth Transformation Board. So that local health and care plan, which has been co-designed and co-developed with partners, is the basis of the Wandsworth element of the South West London 5-year strategy. After we've got the elements for each of the 6 boroughs, we then have a number of cross-cutting areas where we're transforming services at a South West London scale, or we are adding to local transformation with some coordinated work. A really good example of that is where we have local work around diabetes that links into a number of South West London-wide initiatives. And also we have a number of enabling strategies and areas where we'll be setting out a plan at South West London level, and developing the South West London workforce is a very good example of an area where we're developing an enabling strategy on a South West London basis. So really the purpose of bringing this paper here today, I'm not going to go through it line by line, it's to note that the local health and care plans will form the foundation of the South West London strategy. It's to note the engagement that we've done both in developing those LHCPs and also at South West London level, including via a clinical conference, and note that the timescale, as is often the case with these processes, is quite concentrated. We were anticipating this, so had a lot of work in train already to make sure we were ahead of the curve, but there is a slide which sets out the timescale, and it is to flag that in seminar and board sessions very shortly following this one, we will be bringing documents relating to the South West London plan. I didn't know, Josh, whether you wanted to say anything about where we were with the implementation of the local health and care plan, and then maybe Sarah, if there's anything I've missed about the South West London context.
So I think the only thing I'd add is we had a good meeting of the Wandsworth Transformation Group a month or so ago, where we discussed the implications of the local health and care plan and what that means for joint working within Wandsworth for this next planning cycle. It's the first year of the long-term plan response. That was very positive. We then had a follow-up session to look into some of the more technical detail around how some of the money might work in order to implement certain elements of it. I think just as important as what's in the plan is going to be how we're conducting it in the future, working very much a cycle with the providers in step rather than having a traditional commissioning intentions letter and then response and negotiation. So I'm positive that's going forward in a good way.
So I think there's a couple of points I just want to stress. One is it's not a CCG plan, it's a system plan. I think that's really important. It's so we are working with providers, we're working with local authorities, working everyone across the system to produce. It's a South West London plan because that's what's been requested. So it is at a South West London level, but because of the way we work in South West London and the commitment we made in the refresh of the STP, it is built on the local health and care plan. So I think that's really important. The second thing that's really important is that we are feeding in the clinical Senate priorities that have been developed, along with the enablers that we have agreed, and that will give us an overarching plan. The plan is in two parts. It's a narrative which will tell that story, but there's also a whole load of financials and activity that we have to do, which James and others are working on to try and bring together into something that makes sense for the next 5 years, so that it can, there's lots of assumptions in there, but that will make sense. Important to note that even though the timescales are tight for the first submission to the regulators, which is the end of September, the publication is not until November the 15th. So the expectation is that through October and early November, we will have the opportunity to talk to people about this. So it's not formally going into the public domain until November the 15th. So we do have time, but my view would be that you will recognise the plan, because you will see the Wandsworth Health and Care Plan in there, and it'll be really obvious the work that we're already doing across South West London, so it won't be a surprise to anyone. So.
Good, thank you. This question, Stephen.
This didn't come as a surprise, so I didn't have any particular issues on what's here. My question, in a sense, was from the. I welcome the fact that it's been developed with providers and so on. Will this, if I look at life through a provider lens, so if, for the sake of argument, I'm interested in St George's or the Mental Health Trust or anyone else, will this plan give me a sense of their future and what they will be doing?
So to a point, I would say yes. So definitely in all of the work on the finances and the activity, it brings together commissioner and provider into one. So it talks about the system as a whole. So they will, and we're putting in a process whereby the providers are involved in the formal sign-off of that. So we're doing a kind of weekly process, and finance and activity committee where all of our providers and commissioners sit together are actually doing that process for us. They're leading that process, and chief execs, along with myself, are meeting in the next couple of weeks to sign off the sort of finalised process around that. So they'll recognise all of that. They'll recognise themselves in local health and care plans where we have worked with them on of those, and they will recognise themselves in individual work streams where we have involved them. So there's a whole mental health work stream that will be reflected in the plan that they will recognise. So my answer will be yes to that, but what you won't see is here's the St George's strategy for the next 5 years, because it's not actually, I think it's a maximum of 25 pages or something the whole plan has got to be. So it's not going to be here's everybody's strategy as individual organisations. What it will be is a system plan brought together that talks about the population health and how we're going to achieve benefits together.
Just to add to that on a local level, I think that the bit of work that we're doing through the Wandsworth Transformation Group is to try and, rather than having a local health and care plan that sits on top of everyone's organisational plans, try and integrate people's planning processes as much as possible, so that we have a really shared plan, so that as a really good example, everything that we're talking about doing with Battersea Healthcare in line with the MCP contract is really about implementing the local health and care plan. Now, clearly where you have providers who operate in the health and care space in one borough, that's relatively easy to do. Where you have a provider like St George's, inevitably there will be bits of their annual operating plan that will be about Wandsworth-based services and Wandsworth-based initiatives, but there'll also be bits that relate to Merton and other boroughs and Surrey and indeed their specialised work. So there is something about how far we can go in a process of basically making this the basis of everyone's operating plans who's part of the partnership, rather than just some sort of a strategy that sits over the top.
Any questions? Chris?
This paper is essentially a description of the process, and in that sense I welcome the approach. I think it's fairly clear. What I'm interested in is the content, the actual document, and when this board would have an opportunity to comment on that. I don't see at the moment that we have a meeting arranged in October, so can we just be clear what the intention is during October and early November, please?
So we will bring what we have. I mean, we may need to take chair's action. We may need to, work through the process. The national process is the national process. Unfortunately, we are stuck with the timescales. The actual formal sign-off will be at the programme board for the STP, which is where we're being asked to sign it off. And obviously, within that programme board sits chairs managing directors and others. What we will ensure is that we find a way of sharing the final document with the governing body and getting feedback on that. So we have until November the 15th before publication, so there should be time. And I think there's a governing body for all CCGs in South West London before the November 15th deadline. So we should be able to get the finalised document through. We have the same issue with all our provider, because it's going through all the provider boards as well and everyone else. What I would say to you is the narrative we're going to treat is a kind of infographic type thing, and you will recognise the local Wandsworth plan in there. So what we will do as soon as we've got that, and particularly the Wandsworth section of it, we'll make sure we get that out to everyone.
So we have already seen the Wandsworth element of this quite a lot, and then we've got a seminar in October, so we can have a good chew of it then. Of that, certainly. So
just to add on the finance, we'll be bringing that through the finance committees as well, so it'll be work in progress, but you can see how it's evolving as well.
Yeah, that should be all right. Good. Okay. Anything else anyone wanted to comment on or add? No? Very good. Okay. So I mean, mainly for noting and understanding the process, I think we seem to be all happy with that. So that's great. Thank you very much for. I know there's masses of work going on all of this. So thank you. Okay. Let's go on to the next one, shall we? So this is the merger application. So Sarah, you're going to tell everybody where we are.
So we're not going to have a detailed discussion now, because we have got this also in a part 2 where we'll have a lot more opportunity for detail. The reason for the part 1 is really the confirmation from the governing body that we are happy to set up a committee in common, and it's not September the 19th as set out in the paper. We've actually changed the date to the 26th in order that the CCGs across South West London can come together to confirm that we can submit the application. That's the position. The decision on this is for the membership. So this is a membership decision around whether or not we go ahead and whether or not they're happy with the constitution, and we're doing a lot of work with the membership with the LMCs across South West London to make sure that they are in the best position to be able to make that decision and they have the information that they need. What we are currently doing is working with the membership and the LMCs, and we have the agreement from everyone that we will submit an application at the end of September pending a vote, because the vote we are putting back into October now, and we've got the agreement of the regulators on that, because the members, particularly in some of the boroughs, wanted to have a bit more time to go through the documentation and to be able to feed back into that process, and we want to be able to give them that time, and the regulators have allowed us to do that because the national panel doesn't actually meet until the end of October, so they've given us till the 18th, 20th of October to be able to do that. So that's been met with a positive response from the LMCs, both London-wide and Surrey, Sussex, to make sure that we can get to a positive outcome. So just to take a step back, we all agreed in governing bodies in April that we supported the merger going forwards. So what we are now doing is on the 26th of April, we're asking for there to be a committee in common across the 6 CCGs. Sorry, September. Wrong, thank you. It's 26th of September for a committee in common across the 6 CCGs to confirm the submission of the application, and we'll have the documentation all available for the CIC then. What we will then be doing, it will be subject to the membership vote, which will happen in October, and if we get no votes, we would withdraw the application. So I'm happy to have a bit more detailed discussion about that later if people would like to understand that process. But for part 1, what we're asking for is confirmation that we can have the committee in common, because that's our process, and also the members of the committee in common, which from each CCG is one clinician, which is usually the chair, one executive and one lay member. So those are the questions for the part 1 that we're asking. Happy to answer any questions, but we will have time for more detail later.
Good. Okay, Stephen.
Just one point on the membership. I think I'm wearing the number sort of 4 or 5 shirt, but I've been asked will I be willing to act as convener, and I said, since they're obviously running short of potential candidates, I would.
Stephen's going to be the convener, so we need another line.
Anyway, the implication is we would need another representative.
Oh, well done, Stephen.
Well,
He was enthusiastic volunteer.
Good. So we need to just make sure we've got Chris or Carol there.
I'm okay with it.
You're fine with it. Good. Okay. So we will have. That's good. And I'm going and so
One of the execs.
Yeah, and we'll work it out because
Yeah.
we've got some people on holiday. So
Yeah.
we'll try and
Okay. So we'll be covered. That is good. Thank you. So that bit of the process will work if we're going
Yeah.
to a CIC. So do people have any kind of issues or questions regarding going to a CIC and the process? We will chew over a lot of the detail, as Sarah said, later. Chris?
I don't have any problem with this paper at this time, but just to give you notice, I will want to get some clarity about what happens in certain scenarios in part 2.
Okay, well, that's what that time is for, so that'll be fine. And hopefully we can get through that so we can then move forward to the CIC. Just on the membership engagement, so it's happened slightly differently in each borough, just in terms of sequencing, really, more than anything. But just so people know, so we have locality members forum meetings that we're going to do this final bit of the engagement with. Of course, we've been engaging with members for quite some months now, really, on this. There's a set of September meetings and then the set of October meetings, and I'll be going to both sets of those. And in the first round, what I'll be doing is talking through the whole concept and the membership pack that you'll be seeing in part 2. That's actually already been sent out to members, and they'll have the opportunity to ask me any questions and we can work through any of the issues. The idea then being that they're able to go back to their practices. They'll be later armed with the detail of the governance documents, particularly the CCG constitution, which I think is the kind of key document in all of this for the membership. And then they'll be able to come back to the October meeting, having had the opportunity to come to drop-in sessions or email, contact locality leads or myself regarding further questions, but then to do the final vote in October in those 3 membership forum meetings. So I think this is much better than the initial plan where we were hoping to get this all squeezed through in September. This feels much more comfortable to me. I think I can talk to the membership, understand what their issues are and kind of help work through those before we then go to a vote. So I hope that feels all right to people. Carol?
What are the key issues for the membership, and do they vary across the boroughs?
Yeah, so well, we'll find out, I think, in the next couple of weeks if there are any, but what one can say is that my locality leads and myself, we haven't had sets of questions on this from anyone. So I sent the membership pack out several days ago and I haven't had anybody come back on any of it.
I can tell you what the concerns are in the round, because there are different concerns wherever you are. So in Croydon in particular, I think there's a lot of change going on in Croydon at the moment with their integrated working with the providers, and I think some of it is getting confused with the integrated working with the providers and the merger. So there's some concern in Croydon about the working with Croydon Hospital, and then obviously the loss of autonomy, which I think everyone is worried about. We have the most delegated model in London, in South West London, and I think we've given quite a lot of assurances around that, but that's of concern in many areas. Primary care funding and how the primary care committee will work, and the primary care management group, which we've set up a process around that. Although we've now had confirmation from both Surrey, Sussex and London-wide LMCs that they are happy with that process and they can support that. So those are the kind of things that the members are concerned about. Voting rights and who votes and who has a majority and those kind of things they have been concerned about. But actually the proposal that we have on the table is that at South West London there is a GP clinical majority, and at a local level there's a GP clinical majority. So there's a lot of the concerns we have responses to and can positively respond to, but they are similar concerns across different boroughs, to be honest, those ones.
Thank you.
Mike?
Could I just add so a locality view to that? So we've been heavily trailing this this move over the past sort of 6 months across Wandsworth with member practices. So it's not a surprise to them. The member practices concerns, as expressed to me, have been largely first of all, practically around, they want some kind of guarantee of continuity of their touch points with commissioning.
Yeah.
Very selfishly, practices perhaps just want to be sure that the person that they will get through to on the phone is the same person the day after. Also, continuity of payment mechanisms where appropriate. But interestingly, in Wandsworth, I think many of the practices also said that they feel Wandsworth health needs often are quite different to maybe those of Croydon or Richmond. They would want to make sure they don't lose the kind of granularity of being able to do a needs assessment at a local level and sometimes at a locality level. The examples they give us in Wandsworth are that, you know, there are parts of Wandsworth that have a lot of TB. There are other parts that have HIV, sexual health problems. There are so many different, really granular details. I think they're really keen that we maintain our relationships with our local public health colleagues.
So on the first one, that one is also being well, all of those are being raised at all the boroughs. On the first one, I think what we're saying is we think we can guarantee that you will have access to the same people as long as we do the merger. The issue is if we don't do the merger, we have, as we've already said, probably 3 million plus extra to find, which we won't be able to find where we've currently found it. So it could possibly impact on, well, it definitely will impact on the staffing, but it could impact on what GPs access. So I think there was an assumption in some areas that a no vote for this is a no impact, no change, and it isn't a no change. It could have quite a significant impact. So that's the first one. But we're trying to guarantee through this process, and we have guaranteed that we won't change the primary care. In fact, what we will do is level up where we can the primary care support, and that you will still have those people there. So that was the first one. The second one, everyone feels the same way. Health inequalities, health needs. Everyone has a differential health need or local populations. And I think the model that we've gone for is a fully delegated model, which means that all of that work can be done locally. And in fact, it enhances the joint working with local authorities and providers. So it allows you to meet in common with them and to be able to work in a kind of place-based committee that would support that kind of population health approach. And I think with the development of PCNs, that is obviously a real opportunity around how we focus on sort of smaller geographies of population health and do things very differently. So I hear the anxiety. I think that the proposal that we've put in place actually might enhance some of those things rather than take away from them, and it will just be how we make sure we can implement that in a way that makes sense.
Thanks. Any more? Okay. That's great, thank you. So just in terms of the what we're required to do then, so we're approving the committee in common and nominating the representatives. So I think we've nominated the representatives, so if everybody's happy, we can proceed with that meeting on the 25th.
Yeah, sorry, it's the 26th,
26th.
Thursday, and we're doing it 4:30 to 6:30. What I was going to say is we're going to hold the 19th for a possible seminar, and we're going to invite all governing body members. So if there are members that would like to just have a pre-discussion, then there will be a seminar opportunity. Chairs can't, or I don't know if all chairs can't, but most chairs can't because they're going to a London meeting on the 19th, which is one of the reasons why we've delayed it. But we are happy to still hold the 19th and have a discussion with the documents that we have so that people are as informed as they can be going into the 26th.
We've actually got our Wandsworth Transformation Group as well, so I think a lot of us will be busy. Good. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah. So, right, we're headed off on to the management reports. So, executive report first, James.
Yeah, so it's a verbal report. There's probably just 3 bits of service development news that I wanted just to highlight to colleagues. The first is that since we met in July, South West London has been awarded further National Trailblazer funding for the development of children and adolescent mental health services, particularly in schools. £4.3 million further awarded across South West London, and for Wandsworth specifically, this means that this is funding a team to be created, work across further education colleges, and also another team to focus on black and minority ethnic young people who've suffered some form of trauma, to support them with their mental health. So I think that's extremely positive. and on the subject of mental health services and our black and minority ethnic residents, we are actually working with Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network and South West London St George's on some work looking at the patterns of access of BAME service users into mental health services, working between Wandsworth and Lewisham boroughs to look at how those patterns of access occur and how we can make sure that we're providing most appropriate access to services for specific groups. So I hope to be able to report back on that as that work develops. Also working with Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network, I'm glad to see Malik here today. We have won, with the support of our South West London colleagues, some funding to support a pilot programme looking at health screening of some of our communities who struggle to access some of our mainstream services. So this will involve working with communities in settings such as churches and mosques, which are familiar to them, to undertake some health screening. I think we're calling it mass screening is our name for it. This is a small amount of money from the Health Improvement Network, which we are match funding from Wandsworth CCG as well. And this should be a really positive development. We're hoping to get some really good data from it about how we find people who would not otherwise not have access to screening services, so that that data will allow us to support a business case for wider rollout. So that was the second update I wanted to give. The third was that the board will be familiar with the work that we've been doing with Linden Lodge School on their the therapist provision. So we've been doing some work to change the nature of the contract to give the school directly the contract for therapist provision and to tailor the therapist support in the school to the needs of the pupils who are there, so that we can ensure that they're getting the right support. It's a really complex piece of work because less than half of the pupils in the school come from Wandsworth. So James and I have been corresponding with finance directors across half of the south of England to get this pulled together, but that contract has mobilised in time for the new term. There are therapists now working for the school directly and providing a more tailored level of support. I think it will need a little bit of time to fully come on stream, just because it's quite a substantial move from the arrangements that were there before. But I thought, given the time and attention we've taken at board on that, I thought it would be helpful just be to report back that that's now going ahead.
Very good, thank you. Chris?
Well, can I congratulate the officers and others in securing those important developments and extra funding. Can I just ask whether you have or are planning to put this good news onto the website? Because, you know, a constant beef of mine is this all-pervading negative attitude about the health service. And these are good stories. They are local stories. And people should celebrate what we're doing, and sometimes we just are a little bit reticent about making these points.
It's a good point, Chris. I'll work with comms colleagues. So the Trailblazer we have talked about extensively. We've done quite a lot of communications about that, and that's actually led to some very positive local media coverage as well. We would need to talk to Linden Lodge about how we did that, but certainly I know that with the work with WCEN, where I think, Malik, you and I are doing a film next week, aren't we? So I expect that will be gracing websites very soon.
Very good. Shannon?
I just wanted to say that both the pieces of work that you've mentioned around tackling health inequalities in terms of mental health access to services, but also around screening, are things that are very close to what we're thinking about within public health. So obviously any support that we can lend to those pieces of work and be involved would be happy to.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. Good. Anyone on that? No, thank you. So, performance report. John?
Thank you. There's 4 or 5 points I wanted to draw out in terms of performance position, then happy to pick up questions on any points in the report. We've talked in many previous meetings about the A&E position at St George's. We know that it hasn't been achieving the required trajectory and has been some way below the 95% national standard. There's a significant piece of work about to start next week using a jointly agreed terms of reference that the Trust and CCG have drawn together, where the intensive support team for emergency care are going to have an in-depth look at the numerous system drivers that impact performance. We know that there are days where the attendance or admissions is very high, but likewise performance tracks very high, and there's other days where activity is much lower, but performance is also lower. And there's a whole, as with any acute provider, there's a whole range of issues that could be causing those fluctuations in performance, and this piece of work has been specifically designed in a way that perhaps we haven't had a chance to do in the recent past, to draw those out and to really give a full diagnostic across both the hospital itself and then wider system partners on what is causing those fluctuations, what is causing performance not to reach levels that we all want to deliver, and what opportunities there are for improvement. And that will hopefully link very neatly into the winter planning process, which started yesterday and has got a whole series of work between now and the onset of winter to ensure that we're in the best possible place as winter starts to deliver the highest A&E performance we can. We know that winter is challenging every year. We know possibly this year that there may be, subject to further information from our Public Health England colleagues, an increased prevalence of flu if the experience in the Southern Hemisphere translates into England. And we also know that there's been a whole range of improvement plans that we've had over the last year or so, and they haven't quite delivered the impact that we have expected. So we really hope that off the back of this piece of work, we do have the insight to allow us with the Trust to agree an action plan and a winter plan that delivers sustainable performance over the next 6 months. Second point I wanted to raise, we talked about the long-term plan. The long-term plan brings with it now a whole new range of performance indicators that have never been measured before. So there's a big piece of work the CCG and STP will be doing now to look at those new indicators over a 5-year horizon and to see what impact they will have. A number of the transformation projects, for example, the digital project, will now have a series of measures that have never been in place before. It's a very helpful way of tracking impact and delivery, but a big piece of work over the next few weeks to do some of those initial predictions of performance. Third point is around IAP. So the Wandsworth IAP service delivers very well against the national indicators for waiting times, for access and for recovery, but big piece of work we started back in August with myself and Tom Coffey and the Commissioners for Mental Health is looking at some of the waits when people are within the systems, the waits from second to subsequent treatment. There's been some national media coverage over the last week or so on this point as a national issue, and for the Wandsworth service, given its positive achievements against the national standards, we're working very hard with them to bring down to a maximum of 6 weeks the wait between somebody's first treatment and their second and subsequent programme of treatment. There's a whole range of things. We received an initial plan from the Trust back in August, met with them again yesterday where we talked about an updated plan, but essentially it's about using their staff as efficiently as possible, realigning that to the current need, and possibly looking at a small increase in the staffing complement to make sure that we can consistently deliver those shorter waits. The recovery rate for the service is very good and is above the 50% requirement, but we think there's a bit more we can do to make sure that the patient pathway is as efficient as possible. And the final point I want to make is the RTT position. So we talked previously about the Queen Mary site at St George's migrating over to the patient administration system they use on the main Tooting site. There's been a big piece of work over the summer and an external review of that process, which in summary has been a successful review, setting out some key priority actions that need to be completed before the mid-September transition. But I think from a CCG point of view, we are assured that that's been a thoughtful and sound process, and the external review while citing a number of recommendations, I think they are in hand and are being addressed ahead of the 16th of September proposed cut-over date where that transition will happen. And all the benefits that come with the Trust operating a fit-for-purpose patient administration system at the Queen Mary site, where previously they've had a number of workarounds they've had to have in place. The RTT performance will improve slightly, about 1% we predict when that happens, and the current RTT performance, given the re-reporting that started back in January, continues to track above plan for both their overall performance, the number of very long waiters, the 52-week waits. The only area that's causing us concern at the moment, and causing the Trust concern, is some of the data quality issues. So their PTL, their overall waiting list, is bigger than we've expected it to be, and there is some issues there about duplicates, about some data quality cleansing, which the Trust are continuing to address. But that is our concern. Rather than the overall performance, it's back to making sure that the process, the waiting list hygiene, as they call it, continues to track all the data quality issues and continues to address those. But I'll pause there. They were the points I wanted to draw out.
Good, thank you. Does anyone have questions, Chris?
Some interesting series data in this report. Is there any evidence that there are significant changes in referrals? For example, Kingston, on virtually every measure that's in this report, is exceeding the target. So if I was a patient in need of some certainty of quick response, I might say to my GP, well, I'd like for you to refer me to Kingston, please. Or perhaps slightly less, but in many cases not far behind, I'd like to be referred to Chelsea and Westminster, depending on where I might live in the borough. Is there any evidence that's happening? Maybe some of our clinical colleagues may be able to comment on that as well. Because if the patients have this data, they might be inclined to seek references elsewhere than they might otherwise have gone, obviously St George's in some cases, but also Guy's and St Thomas's.
So I mean, I'll respond initially, but happy for clinical colleagues to give their view. I mean, for a while, this information has been available to patients, and I think some patients are very astute around looking at maximum weight, average weights, and choosing accordingly. I think, likewise, there are some patients who will choose St George's because that's very close to where they live, and for lots of other reasons. We did do some work a couple of months ago looking particularly at 2-week wait cancer referrals to see if the full introduction of ERS, the electronic referral system, did have a change in patient flow. And while there was some change, it certainly wasn't material. But it is a very good point that there is now an abundance of access to waiting time data through various websites, and some patients will use that to make sure that they choose places where trusts where there is the shortest wait. But likewise, that we're not seeing a significant impact from that in the referral data.
Got anything to add, Nikki?
I think I'd agree with that. I don't think we're seeing big waves of referrals going elsewhere. I think often patients do see the information on the ERS system, how long, but I think they're focused on their first appointment. And you clearly can see where is quicker, and people will often choose what's closer to home. I think less, and perhaps we should talk to GPs about discussing with them, is the RTT time. I think they perhaps don't focus on that so much when they look at it. They look more about when will I first be seen.
Yeah, that's true. Good. Stephen?
I mean, I think one should just record a sort of degree of frustration on the A&E performance, which is definitely much worse than this time last year, and a terrible sense of deja vu. I mean, you know, this must be I don't know how many reviews we've had of A&E performance at George's, you know, but this is at least the third, if not the fourth or the fifth in the last sort of, well, in the life of this CCG. So I welcome the fact that there is going to be, you know, a review and a fundamental review. I mean, clearly that's necessarily desirable. But, I mean, you have to ask the question, you know, what is going to be different? You know, the famous definition of madness is keeping doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And I don't have an answer to that, but I do think, you know, we should express a degree of frustration that, you know, despite many reviews and many sort of, you know, exercises, we are where we are. one thing I would hope from this is a degree of intellectual honesty. I mean, I do think that either we take these targets seriously, in which case we have to ask the question, what would be necessary to actually achieve them or get bloody close to achieving them? And then are we deciding consciously not to do those things, whether it's resources or whether it's some sort of other, restructuring of pathways, whatever it might be. But just to keep on, doing this and doing that and hoping it'll be different next time, I think is unsatisfactory. So I hope this review will have some intellectual honesty about the challenges and in a sense force us and others to make the decisions either to do what is necessary to start achieving these targets, or consciously say, well, actually, for whatever reason, that we're not being able to do that. It may be impossible. We haven't got the money. We haven't. I don't know what it might be. But let's have some honesty about this debate because it's been going on for far too long.
So, I mean, I think you make a very good point. We are aware that there's been some pilot sites looking at different ways nationally of measuring ED performance, and instead of just measuring the 4-hour weight, measuring things like median weights, differentiating by type of patient. So the 4-hour measures everything from people who walk in with a relatively minor ailment into ED, right the way through to people who are conveyed in by ambulance in a critical condition. So there's also the differentiation of that, and there's also whether there are other things that you can measure, like the time to first clinical assessment or the time to some form of definitive treatment, which are different than the current standard, which is basically the time you book in the department to the time that you leave. So I think that nationally the point has been recognised that this is a standard that's been with us for some time, and actually the world has moved on in terms of the way that ED departments operate and the complexity and range of people who are flowing through them. I think in my experience of dealing with a number of different ED-based systems, both ones that have been performing very well and also ones that have been performing poorly, and in fact much more poorly than any of the local ones in some cases, I think that actually the process of ongoing performance improvement and ongoing review is something that happens in every single ED system, whether it's one that is missing whatever the standard is at that particular time, or whether it's one that's hitting that standard. And a lot of the things that the intensive support team are going to look at are things that we continually looked at when I worked in systems that were consistently meeting the 95% standard, because we knew that if we didn't keep going around them again and again and again, that actually we would fall away from those standards. I think it's the same for St George's. I think that having the external review gives us all a degree of insight and potentially validation where we are doing everything possible to support performance. But at the end of the day, it is, every single element of the system has to work near to its optimal capability to hit the sorts of standards that our patients would expect. So the ED has to work optimally, the rest of the hospital has to work optimally, the discharge system has to work optimally, and all of our systems and processes and teams that work outside of the hospital to stop patients from ever getting into the hospital, ever needing to go into the hospital, they have to work optimally as well. So, in a sense, I think it is the right thing for this to be something that's continually under review, because it's a very complex system, it's very multifactorial, and if for a moment you stop looking at it, then it tends to be something that you have to come back to quite quickly, because it requires that maintenance.
Yeah, true. Sarah.
I just wanted to say, so we're acutely aware of particularly the performance at St George's and Epsom St Helier, because they're two of the trusts across London that are furthest away from their tracking of their target. So it's no longer really about the 95%, although it is, but it's about the target that the individual trusts have set themselves for the future, and can they achieve that. And against those numbers, both St George's and Epsom St Helier are furthest away from their plan. So the spotlight is on them from a London perspective as well, but I think there's also an acceptance of exactly what James said about the multifactorial nature of trying to achieve these targets, and the fact that the approach that we've taken over the last few years of just kind of performance managing and sending lots of people in to support the trust hasn't necessarily achieved the outcome that we need, and that we actually might need to look at this very differently. And we recognise there's things like cultural change, all of the leadership and particularly the clinical leadership, and how we address all of these things across the system. And so I think both Epsom St Helier and St George's will benefit from a slightly different approach, and hopefully that will have an impact. But as we said, it's complex and there's no single answer. And you know, I had this discussion around Epsom St Helier. It's the same leadership team as we had last year when they were considered the best in the country. It's the same, you know, they're using the same systems and processes they were then. Why is it different now? And that's one of the questions they're asking nationally. And sometimes it's quite difficult to actually get to the bottom of some of that. So we are working with the two providers, particularly in South West London, to try and work with them to find some of the answers or to support them, because it's not just a trust problem, it is a system problem. So, but there's no easy answers on this. I think if there was, we would have kind of all done it by now. So
we're headed for the 5th version of the truth.
yes, exactly.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That's a different question. I think it says here that we, the CCG, are managed on St George's performance, and the data here is all about trust performance. And I realised, I should have realised about this before, I hadn't quite focused on it. The Wandsworth CCG line is actually is the same as the line for St George's. So what we're not actually seeing here, I thought we did have in the past, I may have got this wrong, is the data for Wandsworth patients taken together. I mean, it's, you know, which is a different cut, obviously, from the individual providers. And as a CCG, surely we should at least be monitoring that as well as the individual performers, the individual providers.
So for some time now, we haven't been able to access data for Wandsworth registered patients who are attending ED. So the proxy that NHS England have used with CCGs is their main provider, their host provider. There is, I can't recall the latest issue about why it hasn't been possible to map, but I'll take that away as an action and come back to you with a fuller response.
Can I just say though, sorry, but on the how we're being held to account now, we're not being held to account as CCGs, we're being held to account as systems now. So the accountability is that we work as a system, and the oversight that we're doing is at a system level. So we are kind of moving into a slightly different way of oversight and assurance as well. So the expectation is that we will have a whole system approach to everything, and that the whole system will be held to account for everything, rather than CCGs being held to account for this. And so we're actually amalgamating some of that, and some of the way in which we're doing the reporting in the future will be around systems rather than around individual CCGs or providers. So it's complicated, but that's kind of where we are.
I understand that, and that's fine, but I do think that we as a CCG, and I would suspect in the future the borough committee, whatever it's going to be called, should be also looking at what is happening for the patients of Wandsworth. As it were, in what is obviously a very complex set up.
I'll certainly come back with a full response. I mean, I guess when I have seen that data previously, you'll see that patients who've been away for whatever reason in other parts of the country have had a poor experience in A&E. So that becomes the amalgamation of all of that. And then there is the question of, well, you know, so that's 1% or 2 above or below the St George's figure. What can you do about it? Because it's mostly South West London, but a load of other stuff mixed in. But to your point, can we see the CCG level? I'll take that away and come back.
And it is really important, because ultimately what we're talking about here is that each patient and their experience of care, and you can corral the statistics you can cut it in so many different ways, and that will help you to understand where the issues are. But you have to take a choice about which ones you're going to look at, don't you? Because we can't look at everything. But I do think a Wandsworth cohort is important, because the solutions may lie in what happens before you go or after you've come out of hospital with our borough-based services. So although the system is being held to account, actually the solutions may lie in kind of looking at different facets of it. So it's ever so complex, isn't it, really? That's the thing. Very good, thank you. Rue, what would you like to pitch in?
Actually, it's the point we've sort of thought about, are we sort of measuring the right sort of measures of performance in ED? And I was just asking about the Chelsea and Westminster pilot. Is there any sort of, what's the sense about whether their new pilot is measuring sort of the appropriate data, and is it a better?
So we don't know. Sorry, I meet with the Chief Executive of Chelsea and Westminster. I've asked Leslie on numerous occasions how's it going. They don't actually know yet, because they're sucking it up nationally, right. And they're doing the assessment. And actually, the trust doesn't even know what the implications of that are yet. So it's a national pilot. So they are taking the data up into a central kind of repository, and then they're assessing against, you know, whether they think they can, whether that makes sense and all of those things. So we will see, and it is only, I think it's Chel West and someone else over in, I can't remember who the other one is, might be Imperial, who are the second trust that are doing this for London, and there are other trusts outside of London, so there's a national cohort where they're testing the different measures.
Okay, good. John, could I just ask you a couple of things? One is about the new set of the long-term plan indicators. So what's the timeline for when we will be starting to look at those?
So we're doing our initial submission for the 27th of September deadline, and then we've got a bit more time to nuance some of that for the 15th of November submission. In terms of when will we start routinely reporting them, I suspect once we've been through an assurance process around our commitments for the long-term plan, at some point soon after that, they will then become a routine report. Some of them aren't going to be reported monthly. In fact, some of them may be quarterly, annually in some cases, given that they are, most of them, linked to longer-term transformation work. But I think probably once we got through this sort of mid-year planning round for the long-term plan, they'll then form part of the performance report for South West London.
Yes, and then that's where I was going with this really, is to say, so I know what it's like when you come up with a new set of indicators, and there'll be immense interest in what colour boxes and what kind of graphs we're looking at to try and help us to kind of get the best out of the board when looking at this. So, and we don't want to go into one set of things and then move into a South West London approach. So it's being done in one way across South West London, is it?
Much of it asks for a system, to Sarah's earlier points about system view. So effectively you're committing a STP type geography. You can then possibly in some instances break that down to provider trust and CCG level. It's all quite complicated when you try and get a system, a South West London view, because obviously there's peaks and troughs, and is it okay if some subsidise poor performance and others? It's probably, given the complexity and how new some of this is, a paper to our to whichever is the right committee, EMT or Integrated Governance and Performance Committee, but there's probably a paper to set this out and to spell out the 30 or so new indicators.
Yeah, I was really meaning just in terms of presentation of it, to not over-design it before we go into one merged view. You see what I mean?
And I do think it's really important that we still keep an eye on the local, because that's you know, it builds up into a South West London picture, and if we, you know, we can't subsidise everyone at South West London level, there will, you know, if everyone collapses, then we need to know where the problems are and how do we manage that together. So my expectation with it is whatever we do at South West London, we'll still have to have a level of granularity below that allows us to understand what's going on, and therefore to be able to take action or do whatever needs doing. And we will still be carrying on with things like urgent emergency care boards around providers and those kind of things will still continue, because that's how we sort of manage systems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all additional.
But under the new system, all of those reports will look the same. So Croydon will get their cut of it, and it will look the same as Wandsworth. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And then the other thing was just on IAPT. So, you know, conscious of the kind of, you know, relatively good performance there, but there's one kind of segment of this that I've been concerned about, which is the long-term conditions services for patients with IAPT, because that, I think, has not been moving on very rapidly in terms of capacity to see patients. And I just get really concerned about patients with COPD and heart failure and cardiac conditions who really would benefit from this, and it's not very accessible, neither from the point of view of where they can get the sessions and how they can be done, but also just not enough of them and not enough expertise. So I didn't know if that was something you were kind of aware of, or whether you kind of report a segment of this, you know, at a lower level. Or what?
Yeah, I'll hand over to Josh. We certainly could report it. I mean, they are targeting 3 or 4 long-term conditions as part of the local incentive scheme.
And do you see that in your...
So I see that in the contract meetings. We don't include it in the governing body paper, but whether we include it in some other report so it's visible to more than those who attend the contract meeting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work going on to develop that pathway, and I can maybe, similar to John's suggestion before, bring a paper to EMT to describe the progress on that across both. We'll do it for Wandsworth and for Burton.
That would be good, actually. Thank you. Yeah, great. Good. Anyone else have anything to ask on this? No, very good, John. Thank you very much. And finance report.
Thank you. Right, so to note this is the month 4 finance report. You'll note it's a little more concise than it's been previously, so hopefully it's got all the relevant information though in there. To note, still early on in the year, so we're still reporting on plan, but with risks that are outlined in the paper. I think to note there's no new risks that have emerged, but I think what's probably more worrying is the fact that the risks that we saw earlier are not actually moving away. So I think we're going to need to start taking some closer scrutiny around those risks. However, we do have mitigations in place at the moment. Some of that will be addressing those areas that we're forecasting overspends around. I think the key risk really just to flag is around the outer sector acute providers where we're still predominantly on a payment by results type contract. We do still have some of that activity also in St George's, mainly around RTT activity, and we are seeing that coming through as well. It's difficult to know at what point that's going to start to tail off, so that's the conversations that we're having currently with St George's. And then the delegated primary care and a bit of understanding around how the primary care network DES is going to operate. So at the moment we're making assumptions around the fact that because a lot of the DESs don't work or don't start until the 1st of July, we've made some assumptions that there's a bit of slippage around that. So that will need to be played out, but again, still fairly early on in the year. In terms of the mitigations, I think what we have actually got is some flexibility around the mental health investment. Clearly we would like to be able to utilise that, but at the moment, given the around particularly mental health placements, that's limiting our ability to do that. It's not holding back on any investment that we'd planned this year, but this was a contingency that we'd always set aside if the placements did manage to remain within the budget. We're also needing to hold some budget underspends, so at the moment we are seeing underspends coming through, so we're asking budget holders to hold those. We've utilised the whole of the 0.5% contingency, and we did have other small reserves as well available, which again is propping up the position. In terms of the QUIP plan, because of the negotiation we had around the contract, the acute QUIP is largely baked into the contracts at the moment. I think the big risk around the QUIP is around the corporate QUIP that we've got in place, and I think some of the moving forward together, we'll need to see how that plays out for the rest of the year. At the moment we're mitigating that, but that does also assume some achievement through the second half of the year. But really, other than that, the QUIP we're saying is on plan at the moment. So just for the board really to note, it's still early time of the year, but noting the risks that are contained within the paper, and to be assured that the Finance Committee are seeing the detailed report around this and the actions that are being taken to mitigate the position. Happy to pick up any questions.
Good, thank you. Chris?
Just to let the board know, we did look at this at the joint Wandsworth Finance Committee in some depth last week. I think the board should be aware there is quite a lot of heavy lifting that the officers are going to have to continue to undertake to maintain our performance targets here. This is not going to be a light tiller on the finances by any means. Just in case anybody had any thoughts, it might be understandable to think that because we've moved so much of this into block contracts, a lot of that risk has evaporated, and to some extent that's true, but it doesn't mean a bit like an amoeba, you know, you grab it in one part and it comes out somewhere else, and that seems to be a little bit about an issue with the finances. I think we just need to be, I'm not sure the word sympathetic, but we just need to understand and perhaps we should be sympathetic as well, that the officers have got to spend a lot of time making sure that targets are met. And one can say, of course, that's their job, but they're also managing a lot of other things on our behalf as well.
Yeah,
So we're acutely aware of the financial position and the need to make sure that we deliver on that, but not just for this year, to be honest, but you know, if we don't deliver what we need for this year, then next year we're in a worse position. And so we absolutely know that this is the priority in all CCGs across South West London, because we have much more difficult positions in some other CCGs. So the financial you know, constraint and making sure that we're doing the right thing, we're absolutely aware of that and on top of it, I think.
And the challenge at this particular point in time is we're also managing this massive change programme, which reduces people's capacity for doing the business as usual, which I think is quite right to flag it up, Chris.
And I hope that what we're doing is ensuring that local teams have the capacity to be able to do this, whilst actually we support at an executive level some of the change work, because actually that's probably the right thing to do. So.
Good. Stephen?
Just a process point. I'm all in favour of short reports, so well done. But the slide which I've always found the single most useful one that you produce is not here, which is the one with the arrows showing risks and mitigations. And so if we are going to have shorter reports, my personal vote would be to retain that one, because it is the most succinct explanation of where we are, I think.
Good,
Yep, no, that's fine.
Recreate the old reports by stealth.
I know, it's like constant, isn't it?
I like that one as well.
Yeah, no, good, thank you. Anything else? No. Great, thank you very much, Neil. Excellent, so we've got some summary minutes of some committee meetings of the Finance Committee in common, 2 of those, the Integrated Governance Quality Committee, 2 of those, because we're on had a seminar in the middle, didn't we? And then the Audit Committee in common. So did anybody have any comments or questions or anything that those notes raise? No? Very good, thank you. We didn't have any AOB, unless any's cropped up. And we've got a little bit of time if anybody who's come to watch us today and be with us has got any questions or any comments. Sean?
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say how my observation of the Trailblazer, look at seeing my team going out into the schools, has been transformative. And at the beginning, there was a lot of reticence within the school, and now it's flying. And so I really wanted to just applaud all of that and thrilled that it's going on. It's strength to strength.
Very good, thank you.
The second thing I wanted to mention, if it's possible, is the issue of how we get the patient voice into all the structures that we've talked about today. And I suppose in a way, what I wanted to say relates to both papers, the 5-year plan and also the merger. I'm interested in looking at the merger paper in that it comments that the patient and public engagement groups have been engaged in the overall merger process through the South West London forums. And what it feels like on the ground, at home, back of the ranch, so to speak, is that we don't actually know what's happening, and there are new structures coming into place, and certainly the Borough Community Engagement Group is being talked about. We don't know anything about this. We do have people of integrity that have come to the various meetings, the Peak Guy Reference Group in Wandsworth, Thinking Partners, and they have lots of experience, and they have lots of views, and they care passionately about the NHS and what's going to happen. And I feel it would be missing a trick not to ask them to be part of this discussion, because currently all we can see is what's happening from South West London discussions through the South West London forums. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something about bridging the gap between what we have now, what we propose in the future, because the borough-wide group is a very different group from what we have now, and I know there are people around here sitting today that have been to the PPAM reference group and have asked questions. They've been asked questions by the reference group. It is a smaller group that actually has a different kind of function. So I suppose that's really the most important thing from my perspective. The other thing is I cannot emphasize too much how important, on a personal level, my relationship with a lay member has been. And without having a local lay member with commitment locally, I feel my job would be far, far more difficult. And so, first of all, thank you to the lay member, but also I wondered whether you had any thoughts about it.
Okay.
Should have put me right.
Carol?
Thank you, Sean, for your kind words. I agree with Sean that there's been very little local engagement, not just in this borough, but across the boroughs, about what will happen to the lay voice, and it'll come up later in part 2. We had a PPESG meeting last evening, and this came up, and there's quite a bit of, a lot of effort is going into the link between the proposed single CCG and going down to the feeding up the Health Watch voluntary sector and the disappearing lay members, but very little at grassroots level locally in the boroughs. And that was true across all the boroughs who were represented last night. There's a vacuum there. I don't think it's intentional on anybody's part, because the emphasis has been trying to get deadlines met and change happening and get our South West London act together in time to meet the first year deadline. All those things, perfectly legitimate, viable goals, but the local voice is being missed out.
And the functionality of how the patient voice works, we can put all our eggs in one basket and have a patient group that feeds into something. Like, you know, the primary care networks may have patient forums, but actually you get more of a specific result when you ask the right questions of the right audience to get the right answer. So if you have a project on a certain pathway, that you don't use a generic group, that you actually target people who are relevant to that particular project. Yeah. And so I feel I'm a bit anxious about the focus on just concentrating on groups and not embedding the patient voice into the actual systems that we're creating.
Okay, so I think I note the concerns, and I think we'll need to do some work with myself, with my comms and engagement colleagues, both locally and at South West London level, and with yourself. We have been, I think it's fair to say, working on what some of the cross South West London PPE engagement structures are. The basis on which I've been working, Sean, is that we will have as much continuity as possible in our local arrangements, and certainly we are anticipating still having the resourcing that we have for PPI and engagement in terms of professional staffing across Merton and Wandsworth at the moment. We've had somebody leave recently, and we're planning to reappoint. And the structures and processes we have put in place to embed PPI within our transformation work, which you've been so instrumental in ensuring that they are there, because we are anticipating a very great degree of continuity in terms of how our transformation and primary care and other local teams operate. We anticipate that those will continue. So I think I note the concern that it's not something we've been actively talking about. I think we need to talk about it a bit more, evidently, so that we get it right. But what I would say is that wherever possible, in terms of the way we work, the way that we integrate patient and public involvement into our commissioning work, we are intending as much continuity as possible. And if we can continue with our local mechanisms for PPI with as much continuity as possible as well, that would be my intention.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, yeah, more work to be done. We have to make sure that we keep things that are good as we move through this whole change process, don't we? I think that's really key.
Locally,
yeah.
Which can actually really help you in your work, and that's the thing. You miss a trick if you miss them out.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that we want the South West London approach to be added value. So what we want to do is keep the good stuff, but there may be some added value of working slightly differently. And I know that there's some opportunity there as well as everything else. So I think that I think James has made the offer there to make sure that we've got a local discussion going on and that we think about what we need for the future locally. I think I will take back to Charlotte the the comments from today, just so she's aware, so she can start to help to build that into the discussions at South West London as well. It's not, there's no intention to actually impact negatively on the patient voice. In fact, if anything, it's actually to increase the patient voice in what we do. Yeah, and to make sure that the patient voice, and actually in all of the documentation that we are looking at, it makes it clear that the patient voice must be heard at all levels, and that's really important for the whole of South West London. So, and I think we don't want to lose good work, but we also need to take the opportunity to build on that as well, and to do more where we can. Yeah.
Good. Okay, Sian, thank you for those comments. I think we're going to close now. Thank you very much, everybody, for your input, and we're going to move on to part two, a bit of a leg stretch first, and maybe turn the aircon on a bit warmer. Thank you.